The committee members, starting deputy chairs, again 5 minutes each. Start with Senator Seidman.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you all very much for your presentations. Perhaps I could begin with you, Mr. Linton, and it is in fact on the subject of outdoor cultivation. And indeed you talk about your concern with the potential for the development of large-scale outdoor commercial cultivation under security and safety issues. And so I'd like to ask you to expand a little more on this. Particularly, we know that micro growers won't be subject to the same security and safety requirements as a company like Canopy Growth would, for example. And so I am particularly struck by the fact that the only security requirement for micro growers will be a fence, no camera, alarms, or detection systems. So what are your views on the impact this will have on your company, for example, and do you think this would create an opportunity for diversion from the legal market to the illicit market, and particularly open the door for kids to get quick access to cannabis?
Yeah, so we operate across the country. We've had over 200 inspections by Health Canada. And when they show up to inspect us, they look at everything from an audit trail of who entered the building, when did they exit, how many came and went. With 3 keystrokes, I can tell you where every gram of cannabis is in production, is in storage, is in shipment, or is in a home. And everything about the security of that supply chain results in a clarity of zero loss. When we dry cannabis flowers from the originating state to their shipping state, we track a weight loss ratio, so things don't disappear. And so the effect is that I think we have a supply chain that is, upon living through 200 inspections, very well thought out. And I would think that while outdoor may have a future sometime, I don't think it's today, because all we're doing is creating a framework which actually sidesteps all the benefits that we've worked for since 2014 to establish a chain of custody that's trustworthy. And so I'm a bit worried about that. I don't know that it would have a negative impact on us directly financially, in that if people grew it outdoor, they have to have an offtake that transmits it from being a dried flower into a finished good. And that's an asset base that includes extraction, encapsulation, a great number of steps, creating drug identification numbers or beverages, whatever. We do that. So I'd actually probably have an input that'd be much less costly. My bigger concern is that the outdoor grow people will find that their value proposition to me is low because I have a risk on testing. Did it get drift pesticides? And do I have to write off costs of already taking product in? So I would probably offer them a very low price because it's a very uncertain product. And my concern is that they might find Johnny down the block might pay a bit more than me. And so I don't think we would intend them to become economically motivated to sell to the black market or illicit market, but they might. And so maybe that I could go on, but I shouldn't.
Yeah, no, that is, in fact, very helpful. Do I have a few more minutes?
About a couple more.
Okay, great. I might ask you, Dr. Lake, if I might. We're not really scheduled to discuss medical cannabis until tomorrow, but I would like to ask you, since this is what you represent particularly, about your views on the government's approach to medical cannabis in the context of legalization. So do you believe the federal government's new excise tax on medical cannabis is appropriate?
Well, thank you. Thank you for asking that question, because I was hoping I would get an opportunity to comment on that. I think the excise tax on medical cannabis is bad public policy. I don't think you can say, in one hand, that this is a recognized form of medication, and then on the other hand, apply what we have come to believe is a sin tax. An excise tax or an excise duty is designed through public policy to be a tax on something you want less of. So if you look at what's taxed today, it fits into that category. But if you have a medication, and we can all tell you about people, and I'm sure you know people, that have benefited tremendously from the use of medical cannabis, and now they're going to have to pay more for their medication. And so people that depend on medical cannabis might make a choice to use opioids, for instance. That would be, in my opinion, a very bad choice. So I think from a public policy perspective, this is a very bad decision.
Okay.
Okay.
That's
Thank
it?
you.
Am I done?
Thank you. Okay, we'll put you down for the next round. Okay, and Senator Penny-Clare.
Yes, Monsieur le Président. My first question will be for you, Mr. Linton. And you did touch on it a little bit in your conclusion. I'm interested to know, in fact, I don't know how, and maybe I should know that, but how the recreational versus medicinal market are plan, or what you foresee the growth of those two separate markets to be. But my question is on if recreational cannabis market grows, how can we guarantee Canadians who use the medicinal product that it will not have an impact not only on access, because you touch on access, but also on research, maybe medical research, product development, data collection. So do we have some sort of guarantee that, because you're a business, so we want to make sure that the patients that use it now will not be penalized if the recreational goes very well.
No, so as a business, the only answer can be that it's financially good for me to do that. And so if you say that you're a nice person and you'll do nice things, that's not usually true. Mm-hmm. So I think what you'll find is that the direct-to-the-end patient model enables us to interact directly with our client, our patient. And the effect of that is that it's both financially beneficial and informationally beneficial. So I think we'll always have a priority to that. But that's in the short term. Because larger companies are being formed, we can actually do medical research, which means we can move through a process of getting RX approval, drug identification number, that we can actually have delivery mechanisms that are true dosages, which I think will make it an insurable product. And when it becomes insurable, I am absolutely certain the insurance companies will prefer covering the cannabis product over the others because it has less liability typically, as Dr. Lake has commented on, but also it is less costly for the insurer than the other things that they're often covering. And so I think the medical field will do quite well. It doesn't get as much coverage because it's not quite as, exciting to talk about. Mm-hmm. But I think it actually has the strength, and it's becoming a global market. So, for example, when we export and work in Germany, it's all medical. And with 82 million people, I'd much prefer to have a very good medical story in Germany, which originates here, has intellectual property from here, and allows me to work with the Germans, or the Italians, or the Czechs. And so with 350 million people in Europe coming under our normalized medical scheme, you can imagine our priority on the next wave is to really do extremely well medically.
Thank you very much. Maybe I still have time, huh? I will continue. Maybe Mr. Rewak, I want to hear your organization's position on having, some people have suggested that maybe it should be a combined system or structure versus separate. I know your organization is going with two different committee is how I think it's, but just, is it how you wanted it to be, or would you prefer combined, or?
We are strongly opposed to one common system for cannabis. Cannabis can be used for adult consumer purposes, right, for recreationally, but it is also medicine, and it's changing the lives of tens of thousands, in fact, hundreds of thousands of Canadians, and we will never abandon our medical patients as an industry. They have helped build us. We support them, and we provided deputations around what we believe is the inappropriate application of excise tax to your colleagues at the Finance Committee and at the House of Commons Finance Committee. So we believe that the AC MPR has to be preserved well beyond 5 years, not only for social reasons and responsibility to our patients, but also for the global economic opportunity that Canada has in front of us. The Canadian domestic adult consumer use cannabis market is an $8, maybe a $9 billion a year market. Globally, we are the thought leader for a $75 billion global medical market. And I want those jobs, I want that development, and I want that knowledge based here in Canada in our communities.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Unless you got a very quick one.
I have a very quick one for our mayor. And I don't want to put you on the spot because maybe you don't have the answer, but I want to take the opportunity because we've talked a lot on cannabis and normalization of cannabis. So I think you're in a very unique place where your population and your citizens have been exposed to working in cannabis, or like it's part of their daily life. So I don't know if you have a quick answer on, is it having an impact on perception of cannabis or normalization of the risk of cannabis? Maybe you don't know that.
Well, no, thank you for the question, and absolutely, and probably one of the big aha moments was I regularly go to our retirement homes and speak to the residents, and I was at one a couple of weeks ago and speaking to the residents who are largely in their 80s and 90s, and of course canopy tweed is always a topic of conversation, and everybody to a person in that room was extremely excited about the growth of canopy in our community and the role it's played, and absolutely no negative concerns anywhere in the community when it comes to from day one when they announced they were coming to town to today. No, it's been very widespread acceptance.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Sénatrice Meiji, s'il vous plaît.
Merci.
Thank you. In Mr. Le Maire's speaking notes, I saw that, in fact, you hope to double the number and, in fact, the financial impact over time. However, as we know, everyone is waiting for cannabis to be legalized. So there'll be all of a sudden an economic boom. But things will stabilize thereafter. And it doesn't necessarily mean that there'll be more and more Canadians using over time. In your financial projections, did you factor that in? Of course, R&D has been factored in, but if that economic boom doesn't actually come to fruition, well, then the R&D side will fall away as well. Have you thought about that potential impact?
Thank you. Much of the insight I have is a result of the experience I have with canopy in our community, and having been in the facility countless times, speaking with staff on a regular basis, and speaking with visitors quite regularly. And I think Canada has an opportunity to truly be the global leader when it comes to cannabis, both recreationally in a variety of forms. And I look at, personally, I would never smoke a joint. I'm totally opposed to smoking, but I would have no opposition to a cannabis-infused beverage. If I've got a beer with cannabis, a beer with alcohol, it's much the same way. So I see the product development down the road as being something that will become much more mainstream eventually. And I think we will hit a peak, obviously, when it'll become very stable in our community, and we will have some turnover there. But economically, it'll take us from being 10 million of industrial assessment in our community probably to 50 million over a short period of time, and the number of jobs that will ripple into our community and the stock options that these staff have. That's why we're seeing the housing boom. Again, one of those perfect moments was a gentleman I knew in our community who had only lived here, who'd been in our town forever, had worked at Tweed for about a year. And I drove by a house on Lombard Street, and I saw him holding up a for sale sign with sold on it on the front step, and someone was taking a picture of him. So he's a gentleman who had got a job at Tweed early on and seen that benefit. So I think, the day will come when I'm sure they will level out, but Bruce is probably better qualified to answer some of those questions than I am.
Okay. J'avais une autre question sur un autre sujet.
I have another question on another topic.
Some further answer from Mr. Linton, or do you want to go to the next
Non,
question?
peut-être une autre personne pourrait répondre.
Perhaps someone else might wish to respond. But it's regarding outdoor cultivation, my second question. Now, of course, we're afraid of contamination by pesticides, etc., etc. But folks aren't necessarily aware of what might happen. Do you have an educational program of some sort that you've developed to broaden awareness regarding the problems that might potentially arise from outdoor cultivation? Could someone take a stab at that, please?
We don't currently have a program because without lab testing, there is no way to clearly delineate between an outdoor and an indoor product. And at the end of the day, we have a responsibility to give consumers a safe product. And our concern is that ultimately it will get into our supply chain, and we believe that legalization is a process, not an act. And at this point in the process, outdoor cultivation is simply unnecessary. And until we have clarity around the intention of the government with outdoor cultivation, we can't really design that program.
Okay. Mais c'est pas vous qui allez le cultiver à l'extérieur.
But you're not the ones that are going to be engaging in outside cultivation. It's in fact Canadians themselves, no?
Forgive me, I believe you're referring then to homegrown in the backyard. Yeah. Oh, okay, forgive me for that. That is a process that we believe is up to individual choice. We're somewhat agnostic in terms of home cultivation. We believe that public health and safety has to remain paramount. We will seek to work with our provincial and federal partners to educate consumers as much as we can about the risks of outdoor pesticides, the risks of cross-contamination, but ultimately that is the purview of governments, and we will support them in that task.
Okay. Perfect. Merci.
Senator Dean.
Thank you for the presentation. So, first question to our municipal colleagues, people with municipal experience. We have heard a fantastic success story at Mayor Pankow in Smiths Falls, and we need more of them, don't we? Our small towns across the country are under great distress. So the first question is there the potential for Smiths Falls to be replicated across the country as we see more global export deals? The potential for recreational cannabis. That's the first one. Can this be grown and replicated? Is it being grown and replicated? And the second one, we've heard already that this isn't a cold start, that you've been in this business for a long time and you've done very well, and Canada's a global leader. For those who haven't commented already, is Canada ready, and what are the consequences of extensive delay? So if we could start with you on the...
Well, when we went through the challenges of 2008 and through 2010, and even as a little bit later that with the loss of about 2,000 jobs, huge hit to the community. And if you're probably aware at the time, we were national news for all the wrong reasons. And as a council, we were really jammed and stuck, not knowing where do we go from an economic development standpoint. We certainly invested in a new economic development department and team, and really a lot of darts in the board out there to try and see what we could hit. Never in our wildest dreams would we have anticipated a new innovative industry coming along. So when we were thinking of, at the time when so many jobs are actually leaving the country, leaving Ontario, leaving the country, we didn't see a solution. Really didn't. We were looking at tourism and other opportunities and being a bedroom community to Ottawa, etc. But really, when Bruce and his colleagues came to town, we certainly endorsed it and we supported it. And I think we believe that maybe someday, it could be much bigger than what if recreational use is ever legalized. But to take a 450,000 square foot building that employed up to 750 people making chocolate and all kinds of different candy products, and not just filling that today, but expanding out across the street and on the same campus. I mean, a 200,000 plus square foot addition to that campus. I guess Canada has an opportunity to be a global leader and go where other countries have yet to go. I see no reason why it couldn't be replicated elsewhere. And your comment regarding small communities is so valid because we struggle. And we look at urbanization and people moving from our young people and our knowledge base moving to go away to university and college and in many cases not returning. So now we've got an opportunity to draw these people back in. And in many ways, the Rideau Regional Centre created a lot of professional jobs for us back in the 50s and really led the foundation for a long time. This, in many ways, is the same idea. We've got very professional, good-paying jobs with a great future.
And then Mr. Linton.
Sure. Well, thank you very much. And I can tell you from our experience in Massanger, we have a tremendous impact on that small community that has struggled to find jobs for its residents. And if Gatineau Mayor Padenot-Jobin was here, or Councillor Marc Carrière, they would say that this has been a tremendous success story for Massanger. When I joined the company last September, it was easy to find a parking spot. Today it is not. We have grown probably 2 years ago. We might have had 20 employees. We have 150 today, and within a year we will have 300. A couple of years ago, we were growing in 7,000 square feet, producing about 700 kilograms. By the end of this year, we will have 1.3 million square feet, growing 108,000 kilograms. And with that comes a team of people that are experts in their fields, whether it's in the technology, whether it's in intellectual property, whether it's in marketing, legal. All of these things are coming together in a small town as part of the greater Gatineau region. And so we have been a tremendous success story. I also want to share my experience in the Kamloops area. There's a town just north of Kamloops called Barrier, a small town, 2,500 people. In 2003, there was a tremendous forest fire that burnt down the largest employer in town, the Lewis Creek Sawmill. That was turned into an industrial park, and they've struggled to find people to go into that industrial park. Well, now there is an ACMPR applicant that has plans for growing cannabis there, and also a potential partnership with the Simpcw First Nation. So I think there is, now I don't want to oversell it, because I think a lot of small communities think this is our ticket out of an economic doldrums. I think we have to be careful not to overpromise. But at the same time, there are those success stories. Smith Falls and Masson are two examples, and I think there could be many more.
We've got about a half a minute left for Mr. Linton's response.
We are ready. To your first question, we have, I think we could supply somewhere between 40 and 50% of the total demand just from our capable platform. So we have about 6 million square feet. The reason we're in empty buildings and derelict buildings in towns with high unemployment is an economic alignment. If we can pay less for the building, have the same sense of shelter, have a bunch of power on the line, and have a willing and available workforce, that's the perfect equation. And what we're creating are products. So what's going to happen from Canada's base is the Germans come to see us. They have a problem. It's called East Germany. And what they want to do is take our platform, our competency, and our technologies, have us take and create Canadian branch plants, which I think is a novel concept rather than being the home of branch plants. And so I think we're at that tipping point on it, and it doesn't take too much looking in every country around the world to find that part of the country that's a little tough, a little worn out, needs us.
Poirier.
Thank you, gentlemen, for all being here. I have a couple of questions. My first question is for Dr. Lake. In an article that I saw on the Financial Post, it quoted that you will be selling product at an average of $5.40 a gram to the province of Quebec. And according to Statistique Canada's study, the price in Quebec for the month of March averaged at $5.93 a gram. So the margin for the province to compete with the illicit market is very, very thin at this point. And in context with Bill C-45, where the government aims to eliminate the illicit market through legalization, would you agree that it's part of your social responsibility to help the government offer a price where there would be more wiggle room than 50 cents?
Well, first of all, thank you for the question, Senator. First of all, that $5.40 was an average over our entire product line, and that includes much lower priced product and then products that are in the higher end. For instance, our sublingual CBD spray is about $80 for 15 ml bottle. So that would be at the higher end. So that $5.40 is a bit deceptive in that it includes the higher end products as well. In terms of the flower product and some of the lower end products, those would compete very well with the black market. But I think you bring up a very good point. This is, I think, as Bruce stated, this is the beginning of. Oh, sorry, it was Alan. This is a process, not the end of the way we're going to go, the evolution. And so we as producers will have to become more and more efficient in the way we produce our product to ensure that the price is able to compete with the black market. There's no question that if we do all this and we still have a thriving black market, it's not going to work. And Washington State saw that happen because they had, I think, a 37% cumulative tax on products, and so the black market was thriving a year later. They adjusted that, the price has come down, and the black market has reduced considerably. So I think all of us, governments, in terms of taxes, we as producers have to make sure we have our eye on the ball and get the prices down so we can compete.
Okay, thank you. I'll have another one for you if I have time when I come back, but I need to go to our mayor with my next question. According to Dr. Paula Stewart, the rate of cannabis use in the Smiths Fall has already been among the province's highest, showing that half of the town's youth or young people between the age of 15 and 25 have used cannabis in the last year. And her main message had been that it's a drug, not a leaf. And on the other hand, your community has welcomed the industry, and you've been very clear about that with open arms because of the economical boost that it has brought to your community. But yesterday, we heard from a witness in Colorado that since the legalization, adolescent perception of the risk of marijuana has declined dramatically. And so my question is, do the potential economic windfall from the cannabis outweigh the risk to public health for cannabis legislation? And how does your community approach the normalization of the cannabis, especially for the most vulnerable at risk, which is our youth?
Smith Falls has always been a bit of a tough town. We've known that, and the figures Dr. Paula Stewart illustrated are, I'm sure, are very accurate. And cannabis use is again, many of our youth. I think not just our youth, some of our adults. And I was speaking with Leonard County Mental Health a number of years ago after we went through this economic downturn. One thing that became very clear is that as job losses went up and poverty grew in our community, so did the rates of dependence on and addictions. And so if people are discouraged and depressed, they're going through some real tough times, it's not uncommon to see them turn to alcohol or drugs. And if you have adults who are using, you're very likely to see their children who will be using the products. I think an opportunity for a controlled substance, probably an elimination from the black market, puts further restrictions on it. I don't think we'll ever stop youth from using it or trying to get their hands on it. But having it in an environment where it's harder to reach, harder to get, would make more sense. Canopy's indicated, certainly I'm sure all the producers do, education, trying to make sure that the youth are protected in every manner possible. So it has been a concern. I think as our community rises, the economy of our community improves, I think we'll see some of those challenges of mental health and addictions even decline from the peak that we would have had a few years ago.
Do you have any time left, Chair?
Oh, you do. Not much, a little one.
Okay, well, just to follow that, in substance abuse treatment, is it readily available in Smith Falls? And do you believe that the municipalities have adequate resources to manage the cases of normalizations of cannabis among our youth that may rise?
I would say when it comes to treatment, I think it's a problem across the province of Ontario. I don't think there's enough resources available, and my understanding the waiting times are enormous. And when an addict needs help, they don't need to wait 6 months to get there. So that's a clear problem. Although I do have a friend who's got a private run facility in the St. Lawrence who has left the door open for, on an ongoing basis, anybody from Smith Falls who needs help, he's willing to help. He's from the community originally. I'm sorry, your second question?
Well, it was, do you feel the municipalities have the resources necessary to deal with the normalization of cannabis, the perception of normalization among the cannabis and our youth? Do we, the municipalities, have the resources to be able to actually deal with it?
I don't think we do at this stage. I mean, there's a lot of education that's going to be required, and certainly our police service has been involved in managing this for a long time. It's going to change the roles and responsibilities. But I think we still have to get our head around it. But I think it goes back to my previous answer. If cannabis is restricted in how it's available and we can eliminate the black market, I think we have a better opportunity to protect our youth.
Great, thank you. If time allows, can you put me on the second round if we have time? Thank you.
Put you on the second round, Senator Manning.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. My first question is for Mr. Rewak. I'm trying to understand why so many of your member companies have signed various partnership agreements with celebrities when we all know that celebrity endorsements are not permitted under Bill C-45. I'm aware of associations with Snoop Dogg, Tragically Hip, Trailer Park Boys, Gene Simmons, and just to name a few. While the Act forbids marketing targeted at youth, I can't help but notice that many of these celebrities have a solid fan base among our youth. So maybe, can you explain what benefit your members are expecting in order to spend a significant amount of money to secure these deals when endorsements are explicitly prohibited under C-45?
Happy to answer the question. I think some of my response will be to a degree speculative, and forgive me for that. But based on my observations of the industry, we have seen the beginning of a brand new product category, and we've all been adjusting collectively to how to position ourselves within that new marketplace. You are correct. C-45 does provide clarity in legislation, and that's why we've encouraged this committee, and we will continue to, and all parliamentarians and senators, to move C-45 forward into law as quickly as possible, at which point we'll have regulations which will define further clarity, and activities that might go against the spirit of the legislation, once that clarity is provided, can then stop.
Okay. And do you believe, or do you think that there's an expectation among some of your members that the regulation will be relaxed in the future?
Regulations can't speak against legislation. The legislation is exceptionally clear, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Linton, I read that your company recently signed a deal with the makers of Corona beer to collaborate on the production of cannabis-infused beverages. This is interesting given that we don't know what the rules for edible products are going to be like yet. So I know we're looking down the road in the future. So given your investment, is it reasonable to assume that you're confident that cannabis-infused beverages will be permitted under future regulations, or where do you expect people to consume cannabis-infused beverages, given that the province have banned public consumption at this point?
Yeah, so they're not permitted now, but I anticipate it's a potential, a socially normal intoxicant, social lubricant, isn't a form factor of a bottle and a liquid, and people might come over to a person's house and have a glass and have a conversation. I think you can make those with cannabis that do not include alcohol. They carry 0 calories potentially, that have very limited or no drug-on-drug interaction, and I think that is a more reasonable format likely than some of the things we've seen in the U.S. states, which involve some kind of gummy chewing thing that has cannabis in. So I think it's probably more suitable to a normalized form factor.
So is your company preparing for edible products?
I like the word ingestible because I do think ingestible is a different thing than edible, meaning that it could be a beverage. We prepare for whatever's permissible. We don't jump the gun, including we don't participate in the U.S. because it's federally illegal. We stay entirely within the jurisdictions which are federally legal.
Do I have time?
You do. A couple of minutes.
Okay. Dr. Lake, last year your company had to halt sales temporarily after Health Canada found traces of fungicide not approved for use by marijuana growers. Would you like to explain that situation to us and what steps were taken to address that?
Certainly, and I think this illustrates the rigor of a legal, licensed industry with strong oversight. There was trace elements of a pesticide. Once we were made aware of that, and this was more than just our company that was involved in this, and Health Canada was adjusting the limits, so there was kind of 2 issues there: the presence and what those limits were and how they were being adjusted. So we immediately did a recall, and we notified all of our patients. We stopped shipping cannabis immediately, took steps to ensure that future production would not contain any of those pesticides, and also took steps to ensure that all of our fertilizers, pesticides, we only use organic pesticides at the moment, and predator insects. But all of our fertilizer, anything that's going in the plant, is now under a secure area, so that we can ensure we know who is going in there, and there's a complete record, as Mr. Linton indicated earlier. So I think that shows the strength of the system. I can tell you, when I was health minister and I toured my first facility in Nanaimo, British Columbia, I could not believe the level of security, the chain of custody, the rigor that was placed on the production of legal cannabis in Canada. It was far greater than I'd seen for any other pharmaceutical.
Okay. Senator Wells.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, witnesses, for your testimony so far. I want to ask a question, Mr. Linton. You've recently signed an agreement with Newfoundland and Labrador, my home province, for 8,000 kilograms a year, including a retail agreement. Is that production agreement, is that an exclusivity arrangement?
So it doesn't provide us with any protection as exclusive, so other parties will produce in the province. Our obligation is that we will produce up to 12,000 kilograms, even though we will sell only 8,000 in the province necessarily. So it becomes I'll call it an export across the country, and we need to create jobs. So we've found a site kind of up on the hill. Behind us is a dump, and we're going to build about 120,000 square foot facility there that's about $45 to $50 million total construction cost. And so it's one of those things you negotiate. How do we access retail? What jobs do we create? And there wasn't a production asset in the province at that time. I think there will be several after.
Sure, I understand. That's about a 10-minute drive from my house.
Oh, okay.
From what I understand, there's a guarantee for a certain level of demand from the provincial government?
I think what it is that we have to commit that we'll have available to them, because many of the eastern provinces, I think you found it in New Brunswick, PEI, Newfoundland, and even Manitoba, as we came across the country, what they didn't want to be in is a situation when the access program began and they weren't committed to have an actual supply chain that would provide the province. And so what we committed is that we will have not less than 8,000 kilograms available in the first year, and that we'll build this facility. And over time, what we'll do is take the transit of cannabis in and replace it with domestic or Newfoundland production.
Okay. Are your agreements in BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Ontario, Quebec, and New Brunswick, are any of those exclusive production agreements?
No. To my knowledge, every market's still open for other producers, and Health Canada licenses them. What we've tried to do is say that we'll show up first and build, but competition's good for us. We have no, if we were the sole provider, and even Germany offered, would we apply if we could be the sole provider? We said no. People like choice. And so I think you'll find that in all places we'll have other parties' products, even in our stores. Don't intend it to be just our store.
Yeah. Okay, thanks for that. I assume you have, within your production facilities, you have the hazard analysis, critical control points, the QMP programs, all of that.
SOPs that stack up about that high yes.
Familiar. Okay, next question I had was for Mr. Rewak. How many of the companies that are in the association do outside growth, or is that a cutoff line for membership in the association? None. There is no current outdoor cultivation allowed. Is that a cutoff line? Or would you accept outdoor growth?
Our cutoff line is following the law and the regulations of Health Canada. At this point, outdoor cultivation is not allowed. Should that be reconsidered in the future, that's something our board and our membership would have to analyze, but I suspect we would have concerns around allowing outdoor growers to become members until we were satisfied that it was safe.
Forgive me, but it does seem that there's some protection, some protectionism going on with obviously the comments about not in support of home growth, not support of
I should clarify, we are not opposed to home growth. Our concern is with large-scale, industrial-style outdoor cultivation, which most likely would be close to indoor greenhouse facilities, the threat of cross-pollination, and the threat of pesticides.
If I had 2 acres in my backyard, would you be supportive of me being able to grow?
Corn, but not cannabis.
So no. All right. And is that why, back to Mr. Linton, is that why you have your micro-growers fund? I think you said $1 million, something like that. So you can have a degree of, not control, but, well, maybe control or support for smaller growers.
Yes, so we support smaller growers. We have what's called the Craft Grow program. So we have them coast to coast, people who have small facilities, 5,000 square feet, 12, 20,000. And what they do is they produce quality cannabis, but the whole uploading it into the supply chain where you have to do the QA testing, the containerization, be able to do a shipping recall, online ordering, that's where we take the product in and carry out those functions.
It's expensive for an artisanal producer.
But an artisanal producer can find that they get a high wholesale price for quality products produced under the regulations, and it kind of works for both of us.
Okay. Do you have a marketing program in the hopper for when cannabis becomes legal for recreational use?
So education, yes, and I think, we always hear about taxes and these programs. I think the migration is going to be a lot about cleanliness and safety, as we can actually share information about what happens in the illicit grow, and I think C45 is going to make it a more dangerous bit of business to be an illicit producer. I think our campaign is going to be much more about what's not in it. Think of why it's absence of sprays, absence of transit with other dangerous products, whether it's fentanyl or any other drug sale. And so our campaign is about education because I think people will migrate when they know.
Okay. Sorry, got to move on. I can
All right.
Okay. Senator Malte.
Thank you, Chair. I have 3 questions. And they're going to be put to 3 different people. First, to you, Mayor. Thank you for your testimony here before us, for speaking to us. You have cannabis as a new sector now in your town. What about the leftover parts of the plants? Are you composting, I would imagine? Is this compost saleable? Can you sell it within your town? Does it leave your town? And who manages that compost and its quality?
This question over to Mr. Linton. I know they deal with all the byproduct. from their production, and so there's nothing lingering in the recycling bins or the compost in our community.
Right. So what we're obliged to do when we harvest the plant is we weigh the total plant. We capture the weight of the flour, which is the active ingredient, and any of the small leaves adjacent that we retain. Then we take the remaining plant and we grind it up and mix it with a compost mixture, and we either compost it on site or a selected site. And in the case of Smiths Falls, it's about a 12-minute drive from our facility where we compost it. As we go forward and look at hemp, I think hemp has a much more robust opportunity for using the stems and stalks than we do with cannabis.
And the compost that you make, you sell it?
Create the compost and then pay to dispose of it.
So you simply place it somewhere, you landfill? While I have you here before me, Mr. Linton, for you, earlier you said that your corporation is forward-looking, you're set on doing business, and you're growing. You even spoke of doing business in Europe. I imagine that the Canada-Europe trade agreement, this is covered by under agricultural goods, I imagine. To my knowledge, is cannabis all grown in earth? Is that correct?
We're principally governed as the United Nations Narcotic Act. So when we're transiting cannabis between countries, we need the ministers of health to pass it back and forth, not an agricultural product, so it's not treated as a grain. The production methods are very seldom in soil. They're in varieties of medium that range from aeroponic, where it's no soil, just air, right up to what can be an organic soil. But a majority of our plants are grown in either a rock wool or a, if you want to call it peat moss and vermiculite. But it's really truly governed more like a narcotic.
But it doesn't count as an agricultural product. Is that how it's classified? I'm not sure.
It's considered a medicinal ingredient, and it's transited under each country's agreement as a medicinal ingredient being imported. But I think imports are short-term. Most countries are going to wish to have production in their country, which is where we can export our methodologies and actually create Canadian-owned businesses in Germany, for example.
Dr. Lake.
I see. Dr. Lake, in your brief and also in your responses so far, you have told us that legalizing cannabis would lead to less use of the illicit market, the black market, and that your prices would be able to compete with the prices on the black market. And you're likely correct on that. But what are you basing your view of the illegal price on? Who has told you that legal cannabis is sold so many dollars a gram? Where do you know that from?
Thank you for the question, Senator. There are a number of sources of information. Statistics Canada is doing a crowdsourcing survey, so people can essentially go online through Statistics Canada and tell them what they're paying on the black market. And it's a methodology that's new to Statistics Canada. And some people have questioned the methodology and its accuracy, but I think the more data points you get, the more accurate it becomes, and they have received a lot of data points across the country. So the Parliamentary Budget Office has also looked at this and done some work to determine what the average price that people are paying on the street. I think, you know, today we talk about the normalization of cannabis, but I can tell you that it's been normalized, at least in British Columbia, for a very long time, and people aren't shy about, you know, telling people what they pay for their cannabis.
Je comprends.
All right, I do understand that, but your own company, your corporation, to compare your prices to the prices on the black market, are you relying on Statistics Canada, even though you're saying that their data may not quite be accurate, or if you've gone to the black market yourself to ask what people are selling and how much they would pay for your product? And how are you sure that you will be able to compete with the black market prices?
Well, we don't interact with the black market. We don't have sit-down conferences with them. We don't do sort of reconnaissance with the black market. We really depend on outside sources for that kind of information. But the reality is we are selling to a government organization, in this case the SQDC. And so they will determine how much they're willing to pay for our product. And if they find that they can't sell the product because they're competing with the black market, they will come back to us and say, we need you to lower your prices. And so we will have to find a way to do that through increased efficiencies.
Okay, excuse me. Sorry, let's move on. Thank you very much.